Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, thank you so much for joining us for another exciting Treehouse Author Talk via Zoom. We have with us Lynn Goodwin, Treehouse Museum's director. And I'm Wes Whitney, the programs manager for Treehouse Children's Museum and your host for tonight. Before we welcome our special guest, don't forget that you can ask questions and respond with answers, because our special guest will have questions for you too. Just text the presenters through the Zoom chat feature and we'll relay your questions and answers to our guest. We want you to be part of this conversation, so make sure you stay chatty with us tonight. And now, folks, to introduce our special guest. Keir Graff is the author of funny and fantastical middle-grade adventure novels, including The Tiny Mansion, The Phantom Tower, which was named a best children's book by the Chicago Tribune, and The Matchstick Castle, which was an official Illinois Reads selection. He also writes books for grown-ups, some of them under fake names. A longtime resident of Chicago, he lives near the shore of Lake Michigan with his wife, Maria, his sons, Felix and Cosmo, and his cats, Toothless and Totoro. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me give a big Treehouse welcome for our very special guest, Mr. Keir Graff.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back with you. I wish the circumstances were different and I was there in person, but it's just been great to see your faces again and to catch up with you all and just to kind of think about being at the Treehouse anyway. I've always had such a great time visiting with the 92nd Newberry Film Festival, and I know we'll be back hopefully sooner than later, but we're just going to get through this and then we'll be back to doing stuff in person as soon as we can. Should I do a really short reading from just a few pages from the book before we do questions?
I'd love that if you wouldn't mind.
I'd be happy to. I'll just read the first 4 or 5 pages of the book, and I'll just give people a little bit of flavor. And actually, one of the reasons I often do read, sometimes even just the first page when I'm presenting about the book, because one of the other things that a little writing tip is, whenever you can, let readers know who they're going to meet, like really know who they're going to meet on the first page. A little something about that character and what they're like, maybe some of the conflict they're going to be facing, but even more so, if you can let them know right away what kind of character they are, that really gets people on board right away. And Dagmar is she's really maybe my favorite character that I've written in middle grade fiction, because she just started to come right off the page, and characters don't really talk to me. I know a lot of writers say characters will talk to them or whatever, and characters don't talk to me necessarily. However, every time I sat down to write, I could hear her voice in my head. I knew what she was going to say, and she just really came alive. So I tried to express that right away at the beginning of the book, so you would get a sense of what Dagmar is like. Chapter 1, The House in the Forest. The sign on the fence looked like an invitation. No trespassing. Keep out. Danger. This means you. I know not everyone would see it that way. Some people would see no trespassing and stop right there. Even people who can ignore keep out are probably afraid of danger. And there are always people who will be fooled by this means you into thinking someone specifically wrote the sign for them. But that's not the kind of girl I am. That's why I had one foot on the tall wire fence, all ready to find out what was so important that the sign writers didn't want anyone to see it. The forest of gargantuan redwood trees was dark and wild and looked like it hadn't been touched in a million years. I almost expected a left-behind dinosaur to come rumbling through, shouldering aside the massive trunks and flattening plants with its giant feet. I thought of an adjective from my stepmom Leia's word-a-day calendar, primeval, meaning of or relating to the earliest ages in the history of the world. The calendar's 3 years out of date. My dad, Trent, snagged it out of a dumpster, but Leia didn't mind. She told him she doesn't really care what day it is, but she does love learning new words. I hoisted myself up on the fence and started climbing down the other side, just in time to see the gnome trudging through the field I had just crossed. "Dagmar," whined the gnome, "wait for me." I dropped to the ground, hard enough to make my feet hurt, and rubbed the red lines the wires had made on my palms. Completely oblivious to the crust of snot on his upper lip, the gnome stopped and stared at the sign. "You're not supposed to go in there," he said, after he finally read it. The gnome, also known as my 5-year-old half-brother Santi, is exactly the kind of person the sign was for. "Go home, Santi," I told him. "Okay," he said. "I'll tell them where you are." "Don't tell them where I am. Just tell them you couldn't find me." "But I did find you," he said, his eyes as round as bottle caps. "Welcome to my world." I turned to go into the trees. "Later, little man." "Wait!" he yelled. I stopped, thinking, this better be good. "I don't know how to get back." "Are you serious?" I asked. I don't know why I bothered, because I already knew the answer. Santi's the kind of kid who can't find his way to the bathroom without a GPS. He nodded. "Wait here then," I told him. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" He looked around, obviously trying to figure out what to be afraid of. "Cows?" he said, because the field was fenced and there were a couple of piles of old, dried up cow poop. At least I thought it was cow poop. "We haven't seen a single cow since we got here," I told him. "They're probably hiding and waiting till I'm alone," he said, starting to sound like he might believe it. "They might stampede." I sighed. "If you're so afraid of cows, then come with me." "I'm afraid of that." This was getting exasperating. Why didn't Leia ever look after him? But really, he didn't have anything to worry about. "Then go home, Santi," I said, turning around again, ready to conquer the mysteries of the primeval forest. "You'll be fine." As I stepped into the waist-high ferns and craned my neck up at the towering redwood trees, I heard whimpering, a digging sound, and then a wail of misery. Putting my hands on my hips, I turned around for the third time and saw Santi stuck under the fence. Yes, I laughed, but I was also kind of impressed. I didn't think the little guy had it in him. "Come on," I said, pulling up the bottom of the fence so he could wriggle through. When he stood up, his entire front side was covered in dirt. "We are gonna get in so much trouble," he said, as he followed me into the trees. So that tells you a little bit of what Dagmar and Santi are in for and what you're in for as well.
I love it. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I missed the fact that we don't have an audience that can make this sound over and over again.
I will just imagine wild cheering in my head. That's what I do anyway.
Now, as we move into question and answer, we want to remind everybody that if you are signed in with us, we're hoping that you have some questions that we want to share. We're going to ask you to put those in the chat box, and then we will share them with Keir. I have a few to start off with, if you don't mind. Now,
Absolutely.
I have the pleasure of having read all 3 of your books for middle grades, although there was one more that I had.
There's one that preceded them by a number of years called The Other Felix.
And I'm hoping to get my hands on that one. And I did read, I found a Matchstick Castle short story in Boy's Life, of all places. And so I read that as well. I was glad to find something else in that universe. But that's my first question for you. Is I feel like, and I have evidence for this in the text, that all 3 of these books, at least, belong in the same universe.
That's a great question. So yeah, I do put a little Easter egg. Since the Matchstick Castle, I've dropped a little Easter egg into each of the subsequent books, kind of referring to that world. And yeah, in some ways you could say, some readers might say the world of the Phantom Tower is very different from the Matchstick Castle, which is very different from the Tiny Mansion. But to me, it's like, the Phantom Tower is the only book that really has kind of true fantasy elements, although the others I would say are fantastic fantastical. They're, some of the action is so wild that it maybe stretches the bounds of credulity a little bit. That's sort of just, I put those little Easter eggs in there just kind of as a little wink and nod to my readers who have stuck with me for all the books. I haven't truly conceived of them as being in the same universe, although I am dying to do another Matchstick Castle story. Those characters are so dear to me. And I even have an outline for a book in that universe. There have just been a number of reasons that I haven't tackled that yet, but I'm really still hoping to do that at some day, because of these books, I really feel that the Phantom Tower and the Tiny Mansion are complete in and of themselves. But I think that the Matchstick Castle could really go further, because those characters have a lot more adventure in them.
And as a structure, it's very interesting, the Matchstick Castle. The tiny house, I think we saw it just on the cover.
Yeah.
You kind of know what to expect from that structure, but the Matchstick Castle, I don't feel like we saw all of the rooms.
No, there's definitely more to reveal there. I feel like it's a house where the residents haven't quite seen every room, as evidenced by the fact that their uncle's lost at the beginning of the book. He's in the house, but they can't find him.
So let's talk about real world. You already talked about in the earlier part of your presentation about having had some of the same experiences that Dagmar has. Mm-hmm. When camping and being covered by spider webs and dew, and let's talk about other things that intersect with your real life. Sure. I think at least one of your pets shows up, doesn't he? And my question is, if is your Totoro as placid an animal as the Totoro in the book?
Our Totoro is. It's funny, yeah. So our two cats, Toothless and Totoro. Toothless after the dragon and How to Train Your Dragon, because she really does look like the animated film dragon. She's just sleek and black, and that dragon is so feline that just was perfect. Our Totoro is, so a family favorite movie for us is My Neighbor Totoro, the classic Hayao Miyazaki film. It's just I can't recommend that highly enough to anybody who hasn't seen it. It's just a delightful movie for all ages. And there's a forest spirit in it named Totoro that is just this wonderfully peaceful presence, but kind of big and round, and I don't know, like so gentle, but also kind of so big that it's a little bit awe-inspiring. And so our Totoro is a striped, a calico cat who is also fairly round, not as placid as the cat in the Tiny Mansion, in that she would not be content to be carried around like that. I always say it's sort of like carrying a barrel with wiggly legs, because she's just not much of a lap cat, but she is an adorable cat. And so I like throwing some little real names into the books from time to time, partly in tribute to the great Miyazaki character, partly in tribute to our cat. Also in my older son is named Felix. My first book is the other Felix. There's a Cosmo in the Matchstick Castle. My other son is Cosmo. So definitely I do slip stuff like that in.
It makes it fun too for your fans to be able to experience some of those things. But even if nobody else ever saw it, then knowing that you can find the same author in all three books is fun.
Yeah.
It's got to be fun for you to put in there too.
Well, and as an author too, the character of Kingsley Van Dash is kind of a favorite of mine, because he's this very eccentric author. And I just have so much fun coming up with the titles of the books he might write. And I love it when I hear from kids. Kids definitely get a kick out of those. I'll sometimes get an email from a parent of a kid or somebody, like they've reached that point in the book and they've made that discovery. And it's just so fun to see that, kind of light up. And speaking of kind of real life crossover stuff too, Phantom Tower is full of that stuff, because that story is actually set in my building here in Chicago. I'm sitting in the model for the Phantom Tower, and that book was very much inspired by things that happened when we moved into the building. The day we moved into the building, there was a knock at our back door. Our apartment was full of boxes and a mess and everything. There's a knock at the back door. There's this very well-dressed older lady with a heavy German accent at the back door. She had gifts for us, and she gave us fresh strawberries. She gave us a bottle of champagne, and she gave us a roll of toilet paper. Uh, and I always get to laugh, but it's absolutely true. And it turned out that she was a princess. She was a real life princess. People around our building would call her princess, and I thought, oh, that's just a pet name or whatever. And I learned several weeks later by asking that she actually was a princess by title, and she had a very fascinating story. And that turned something on in my head, because I thought, wouldn't that be a cool book? Some kids move into an old high-rise and meet a real princess. And then I learned other things about the building, like there's a large surface parking lot next to our building, which is really unusual in this part of Chicago. We're right on Lakeshore Drive. It's very expensive real estate. It's the only surface parking lot in the area I know of. But it turned out that originally they were going to build an identical twin building to ours. This was going up during the end of the Roaring 20s. And then the stock market crashed and the Great Depression slowly began. And the developers decided they couldn't complete the second building. So when I learned that there were going to be two identical twin buildings on the site, that also kind of got my imagination working. So then I started thinking about the story about kids, twin kids who move into this building and meet a princess and all this stuff. And it just kind of kept going. But that was very much inspired by the princess knocking on our back door, and then thinking there might be a story right here in this building where I live. And I didn't have to go far to research it.
I love that. I have to ask you then, and I'm not giving anything away. If you haven't read that book, you should definitely read it. But I have to ask you, is there a floor 13 in your building?
There is not a floor 13, and that was the third piece, really. So I'm from Montana originally, and I grew up in a decent sized town, but there were no buildings over probably 8 or 10 floors, I think, in town. So it wasn't until I was an adult and visited a bigger city where I learned about the whole thing, where many skyscrapers don't have 13 floors out of the old superstition against the number 13. And I thought that was, I did learn that some years ago, but I just thought that was so fun and fascinating. And our building does not have a 13th floor. And so that becomes very key to the Phantom Tower. And that becomes a key plot point. And if people look at the cover of that book, they'll see the little elevator indicator, right, of the old-fashioned one that does not look like our building, but is a fun little visual detail. There's no 13 on that.
That's fun. What a good, I think one of the things I'm hearing from you as a writer is that observation and paying attention to the stuff in your actual life is a real key to finding inspiration to writing.
It's so important. It's just so important. I always tell kids, you can't be a great writer without being a great reader. I mean, that's just first. You've got to be a voracious reader. That's how you start to become a writer. And the second thing, of course, is to write a lot. But you also really need to be a great observer of people and the world around you. And it has to come from genuine interest in people and the world around you. I was visiting with another writer in Chicago last week, and he was saying, I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but he said, I'm just a watcher. And he talked about, he'll just be walking down the street and he'll see something interesting. He'll just veer off course and go investigate. You just kind of have to be curious about the things around you. And, and I think that great writers have empathy, because I think that you have to have empathy you have to try to understand other real people in order to understand the characters that you write. But being observant, I'm the kind of person, I'm always staring at people, like hopefully not in a creepy way, but if I'm in the city and I see some people having a heated conversation across the street, I'm thinking, what are they saying to each other? I'm watching their body language for cues. Are they breaking up? Are they having the fight of their lives, or is this a minor disagreement? Is there a story there? And sometimes you almost imagine the story for them. That's been a lifelong fascination for me, is just trying to kind of observe, and understand the world around me.
So we've got a couple of questions here that lead from this. So reading for writers, you say, is important.
Yes.
Did you have a favorite chapter book as a child? And And did that inspire you to become a writer?
I think I was wanting to be a writer from the time I was reading, like, Ezra Jack Keats, The Snowy Day and stuff like that. I mean, when I was 5 years old, I dictated a story to my dad called Zorro and the Bad Guy, and he typed it on his typewriter. And seeing it, it looked so official to me. I was hooked. Like I felt like I was a writer right then, and I continued to write from there. I wrote. I keep these handy. I wrote books. Just I'm peering into the green screen. That is funny. I would write, books by hand, draw the pictures, sew the pages together, paste them into little hardcovers, things like this. So I was always, I think if anything, I was inspired to be a writer because I love telling stories, but also I probably did just I wanted to be like the people who had their books on the library shelves. Now that said, some specific books that I loved, I mean, oh boy, I read everything. And some of my favorite kids' books actually were the famous 5 books by Enid Blyton, because my grandparents would visit Scotland, and they'd come back and they'd bring me these, they're like these just kind of very mild-mannered adventure books for kids. But they were so interesting to me because they described a world that was very different. The kids were always going to have seaside holidays, and they were, having jam and crumpets and scones and tea and, doing things that were really foreign to me, even though they were very ordinary to like British kids. And those books I loved those books, even though I don't think they really hold up today. Books that I did love that hold up today still are Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain. Was just that 5-book set was my Lord of the Rings. That was my Harry Potter. I loved those books. And, they were really, I think recognized. One of them won the Newbery Medal. One of them won a Newbery Honor. They're still in print. And I still recommend them to kids today because I think that they hold up very well. I recently reread several of them and really enjoyed the experience. So those were probably my, go-to favorites in like, 4th and 5th grade. I just devoured those books.
Well, we're huge fans of those Lloyd Alexander books at our house.
Yeah.
And I think I have at least one Gertie living at my house right now.
You hear crunchings and munchings from time to time?
Crunchings and munchings all the time, especially from the teenagers. So
I hear that as well.
I've met one of your teenagers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I was telling Cosmo today, like, I'm going to the Treehouse. You've been there. Was
he impressed?
He was. He was very sad that we weren't able to come this year. He was totally on board. He was ready to come back. He's a very quiet guy, but he just really loved those visits and loved being part of the show.
Well, we liked having him here too, and boy, we can't wait until we get to do this again in person. Yeah. Now, another question we have from our chat box here is: as you begin writing any new book, aside from the ones that you get from real life, how do you come up with the names of your characters?
Yeah,
Dagmar is an unusual name, just coming to mind.
Yeah, well, Dagmar was a short list name for if we had a girl. We have 2 boys. We didn't have a girl, and I just always liked that name. It's to me, it just, different names sound differently to different people, but to me, it sounded like old-fashioned, old-world glamour, like a movie star from the 1930s or something. And I just loved that name. And probably in Europe, they'd probably be pronouncing it Dagmar, but I think that, American readers are going to hear it in their head as Dagmar. I love unusual names. My parents were named Tom and Nancy. And when I was a kid and I really was struggling with having an unusual name, I kind of asked them, why did you name me Keir, And they said, well, we just felt like our names could have been a little more interesting. We wanted to give our kids more interesting names. And of course, now as an adult, I'm very appreciative. But at the time when I went to school, I was surrounded by, there were 4 Matts and 5 Kevins and 7 Jasons and nothing wrong with those names, but they were more common. Now I visit schools and you never hear the same name twice. It's just wonderful. There's so much variety in names and I love it. To the question, despite my love of unusual names, I really struggle with naming characters because to me, it has to be just right. I'll try on different names and I just, no, that's not right. That's not right. That's not right. Usually when I'm writing, I'll just kind of try to quickly assign a name just so it doesn't hold back the story. But I try to settle on a name before I've written too many chapters because I don't want to be doing a find and replace. That's just an odd thing to do. But what I do is I have a notebook that I keep with interesting names. When I hear them, I write them down. I have been known to go through baby name books, like literally 30,000 baby names, trying to find the right darn name for the character. One great new tool since the advent of the internet is there's so many baby name sites, but what's really interesting is thanks to census records, you can find names that are kind of appropriate to the age of your character. So sometimes I've done this naming like adult characters in books. I'll try to find what popular names were for a character born, say, in 1980 or whatever. And, you don't necessarily choose the most popular, but you're looking at something in the top 30. So it's a name that is probably resonant for that time. So I'll do that sometimes. Sometimes I try to come up with a name that has some sort of hidden meaning or special resonance. And sometimes it's just the sound of it. Like in the Matchstick Castle, the uncles, I just wanted these, wacky old world kind of British upper crust names. Kingsley is just, I like the writer Kingsley Amos. He wrote one of my favorite comic novels, but it just sounds like you hear the word Kingsley and you're just like, oh yeah, that guy has a smoking jacket, right? So the ideal character name almost tells you something about them before you meet them, right?
Right. And I suppose with a name that isn't all that common, like Dagmar, then you have to come up with an explanation.
Right.
And she defines her name in the book, which I appreciated.
Yeah, she tells you what it means, and also you get a sense that obviously her parents are split up, and you get a real sense like her mom is all business, her dad is not all business, and her dad remarries a woman who is super artsy and a little flighty maybe, but it kind of shows you what his real nature is, and so it gives you a clue. Like if you're an adult reader of the book, kids are probably not thinking about this, but if you're an adult reader of the book, you're thinking, yeah, Trent probably is the guy who lobbied for the name Dagmar.
I'm saying this as a person who, all of my brothers and sisters have very strange names. So my kids ended up with the very common names. And some of them are listening tonight as well. And I will have to have that conversation about whether they would love to have been named Dweezil instead. Now,
names exist like in, there's no, they don't exist in a vacuum. They're often in response to something in the family like that, for sure. Obviously that's why my parents went in a different direction. This is a super short aside about my name, actually, is that my parents first heard my name from the actor Keir Graff, who was in 2001, A Space Odyssey, but they first saw him in the film version of the play David and Lisa. So that would have been a year or two before the Space Odyssey. So they heard that name, learned it was Scottish. My mom's got Scottish ancestry. They liked it, so they kind of filed that one away. Well, flash forward 17 years, I'm senior. I'm in the senior play at my high school, and I actually was thinking about not being in the play this time. And the drama coach is like, Keir, I really want you to try out. I think this would be a good role for you. I didn't really know anything about the play. I read for it. I got the part. I got the same part that Keir Graff played in David and Lisa in the play, like the play that the movie was based on, where my parents first heard my name. So weird life coincidence. And then my dad played my dad in the play.
Oh, even better. Now, we've got time for just a few more questions, and if you've got another one, please make sure that you give them to us. Keir, I'm going to have to write you with more questions, because I've got a lot more for you. especially now that I find out that we're fans of the same books and films. But one question that I really wanted to find out the answer to is that you write in different ways. I love your stuff for middle readers, but you write books for adults as well, and you write under different names. But I'm particularly fascinated by the idea that you write with someone else.
Yeah.
You have a job writing with another writer, and I want to just know a little bit about that process. Is it something you enjoy doing? Is it something really hard?
It is living agony. No, I'm just in case she's watching. No, it's a delight. I write with a woman named Linda Jaffe Hall, and we write under the pen name Linda Keir. So just both that way we both get our names on the book. But I just never liked the idea necessarily of two author names on the cover. I don't want the reader to be thinking too much about the author or the team of authors that wrote the book. When they get into it, I want them to just plunge into the story. But really, one of the reasons we also chose to use a pen name is that because I also write for kids, and those books are very much not for kids. They're very much adult works, and I absolutely did not want anyone to accidentally read those books who shouldn't. But the partnership was completely accidental. I met Linda at a writers' conference, and we were talking about books, and an agent friend of ours just said, "Oh, you should write a book together." And we just were kind of like, what? That's crazy talk. And then we met each other again some months later at another writers' conference, and we were laughing about it. And then, I don't know, maybe by day 2 of the conference, we ran into each other again, and we said, well, I don't know, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And so we decided to try. And I love collaboration in general. Like I obviously I loved collaborating with James Kennedy on the 92nd Newbury Film Festival. I have written a couple of screenplays, unsold screenplays, but with a friend years ago. I've done some playwriting, which is obviously a very collaborative thing, and I love that. I mean, there's nothing like hearing actors bring your words to life. Now when I hear audiobook narrators reading my books, it's the same thrill. So I've always liked teamwork because I just feel like together we can make something greater than the sum of our parts. And writing a novel individually is still somewhat collaborative because your editor is going to weigh in, your agent's going to weigh in. There are definitely people talking to you, but writing a whole book with somebody is different from the ground up. And our books, we had to learn how to do it, and I could spend hours talking about how we did that. But the short version is that we write from we have multiple perspectives in the book, and we each write different characters. We write in limited third person, so you're not jarred between different I perspectives. So it's you're kind of in one character's head, but it's third person, and the chapters alternate. And we each choose characters to write, but then we revise each other's work pretty extensively, which is a way of kind of blending the voices together. Uh-huh. And the greatest compliment we can get is when people say, oh, I didn't realize till I'd finished the book that this was actually a team, or, it really reads like one author. And we do hear that fairly often. And over 3 books, we're about to start writing our 4th book. And over 3 books, I think we've really learned how to do that. And we've learned how to tell stories together. And, it's just great. If one of us is having a bad day, the other one picks us up, and, vice versa. Writing can be sometimes lonely, and sometimes you have successes to celebrate. And it's really fun to celebrate with somebody too.
Oh, that's great. Wonderful compliment to not have anybody notice. I find as an actor, I like that same compliment. I didn't know you were playing 2 different parts.
Yes, right.
Very similar feeling. Well, we've got one more question from one of our guests, and it's someone who noticed that your at least middle reader books, the 3 that I have read, are about structures in peril.
Yeah.
Buildings in danger. And the Matchstick Castle certainly is in danger of being torn down. The Phantom Tower is in danger of maybe disrupting the entire universe as it's taken down. And this little tiny house, but they all seem to get out of it. None of them quite like the tiny house does, actually running away. Well, I think I can say that without giving too much away for those who haven't read it.
It's got wheels on it.
is there another reason, another secret behind why you picked buildings in danger as the centerpieces?
That's a great question. I've never gotten that question. And trying to rapidly psychoanalyze myself, I think that, one possible answer to that is that, so I love architecture. My wife is an architect. We live in Chicago, which is a city with amazing architecture. And I'm also a very nostalgic person. And nothing pains me quite so much as seeing a beautiful old building get torn down for an anonymous condo building, going up on the same corner or whatever. And I've never thought of it this way, but the fact that these unique structures are always in peril probably comes from that, like that genuine, weekly sadness I have about learning that some cool old place is gone. I know that, cities rebuild themselves and change is unavoidable. And I accept that, but it's hard for me to accept that. I wish all the old buildings ever would just stay. So that's probably where that comes from.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. I was driving down one of our main streets and saw a big hole in the ground, and you start to ask yourself, if you didn't know before, what was there and how did I not appreciate it when it was there?
Yeah. Well, Google Street View, actually, now they've got the archival feature, which I have definitely used that when I've seen a construction site. I'm like, wait, was that the thing? Wait, what was that? And you can go and you can see what was there several years ago. It's amazing, amazing technology.
Well, thank you for cluing us into that.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got more questions for Keir, you can send them to us, or he has a fantastic website and you can get a hold of him. We thank Keir. I'm sad that we're out of time now, but thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to all of you for attending. If you missed any portion of tonight's author talk, an edited version of this program, edited without the parts that you had to tune in to see, will be posted on our Treehouse YouTube channel at youtube.com/c/Treehouse Museum. We want to give a special thanks to Treehouse's director, Lynn Goodwin, for handling all of the behind the scenes part of this webinar, including our polls. And thank you, Keir. We're going to use polls more often when we do these. They were a lot of fun. And ladies and gentlemen, please, a big thank you to our special guest, author Keir Graff. He's published 9 novels under 3 different names, but you can find him on Twitter at Keir Graff and find out more at www.keirgraff.com. Keir,
that's right. And if you just can't get enough Keir Graff, you can always sign up for my newsletter, which is called Graff Paper.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Keir. And we can't wait to see you back at Treehouse again.
Well, Wes, Lynn, everybody at the Treehouse, thank you so much for having me. It's just great to spend an evening with you. And thanks to everybody who showed up tonight. Appreciate the questions and just appreciate the chance to present to you. So thank you all so much. And I hope to be back out there before too much longer.
We hope so too. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Treehouse Museum is in Ogden, Utah. But don't forget that you can visit Treehouse anytime online at treehousemuseum.org.